Welcome to Lecture 7, Communications and Operations Management. This domain focuses on the daily use and protection of information assets and information systems. These are the formal policies and procedures and controls that are needed to protect the exchange of data, that is to say, the communication. So the security program needs to include these operational procedures and controls as having well-defined responsibilities. So this is the kind of meat and potatoes of an organization. So an organization will have a lot of operations, and they need to know that they're how to run the business on a day-to-day basis. For this, we require a standard operating procedure, and this will provide direction, improve communication, reduce training time, and improve work consistency. When you go to Starbucks, for example, your coffee is made in a specific way. The reason for that, there's going to be a procedure, a standard operating procedure, to make sure that that workflow is efficient. That's true in many organizations. The standard operating procedure establishes what the rules of the game are and how the company officially does business. It reduces dependency on individuals or institutional knowledge. So the reason you're going to want to have standard operating procedures is that you can easily train people to perform a particular function, or more easily do that. So if somebody gets sick, or somebody is away, somebody leaves the organization, there's another person that is able to work because they can follow the standard operating procedure. So you don't want any business process depending on what one individual person knows, and there's a conflict there, right? Because there are going to be individuals that want to ensure that their position is maintained. They need a sense of importance, of course, and that's completely understandable. But from a company's perspective, we want to make sure that other people can perform that particular job function. And so, when you've done, if you've done a project and it wasn't documented and it now needs maintenance, it's going to be very, very difficult to do that if there were not standard operating procedures in place. If we didn't know how we did that in the first place, we have to go to the person who set it up. And so whenever there is, you're going to need people that have worked in the organization for a long time, that know how things work in the organization. But when those people leave, they leave a lot of their knowledge, understandably, will go with them. And so without having these standard operating procedures in place, you're going to have to reinvent the wheel every time, and that's inefficient. So as you develop these standard operating procedures, you want to make sure that the instructions are quickly understandable, that they're easy to memorize, that they can be written in short and direct sentences. And so, there are going to be different ways that we'll look at in this lecture on how to format, how to organize the standard operating procedure. And the choice in format is going to be related to how many decisions is the user going to be need to make for the procedure, and how many steps or sub-steps are involved. If it's a very, very complicated process or procedure, you will have to have many steps. You may need to use a graphical format, for example. But sometimes, it may be 10 steps. Then you'll know how to complete that particular task. So in this lecture, we are looking into communications and operations management. This domain focuses on the daily use and protection of information assets and information systems. So the day-to-day operations of a business. So there are going to be formal policies, procedures, and controls that are needed to exchange data, that is, to communicate. So a security program is going to need to include the operational procedures and controls
with well-defined responsibilities. So we need to know, how do we run our business? That's essentially what this is about. To do that, we need standard operating procedures. Most large businesses will have this. And what the SOPs do is they provide direction, they improve communication, they reduce training time, and they improve work consistency. One of the key aspects of any successful business is predictability and consistency. So it's essentially the rules of the game. How does the company do business? And this is very useful because you want to reduce dependencies on a specific individual or institutional knowledge. Because if you have standard operating procedures, you could have somebody, come in and with very little to no training, review the SOPs and know what to do. So a business process shouldn't really depend on what a given individual knows. And that's important. But you have a conflict here immediately because you're going to have individuals that want to retain their positions in the company, not necessarily want to share how they're doing their work. But our job is really to try to document this so that somebody else could do that job if required. And it's useful, right? Because let's say the person is away or sick, they need to be able to have somebody else come in and follow the procedure. So just imagine if you didn't have these procedures in place. If you were doing a re-engineering project that wasn't documented in the first place, and now when you come to need maintenance, then it's a big job to figure out what was done before. So in a small company, this can be pretty critical, right? Because once you have a certain individual that's been working there a long time, it's a small business, and they leave, then their knowledge goes with them. So you want to develop standard operating procedures, and these will have instructions that are clearly understandable to the audience. They're easy to memorize. They're written simply in short and direct sentences. Now, there are a number of different ways to format and organize an SOP, and the choice that you use will be related to two factors. That is, how many decisions the user will need to make during the procedure, and then how many steps and substeps are there in the procedure. So if there is just a few steps, you can use what's known as a simple step procedure. If it's long, that is to say more than 10 steps, then you want a few, with a few decisions, you may want to use a hierarchical or graphical format. If there are many decisions involved, it's likely that you want to use a flowchart. And so, depending on the procedure you are describing, you'll make a decision as to which format is going to work best. So with the simple format, there's going to be a list of numbered steps with no sub-steps. Okay, so this is one for backup tape transport procedures. In the hierarchical format, there is going to be detailed sub-steps, but it's easy to read for experienced users. So let's say, for example, the person is very familiar with creating a new user, but they're not so familiar with completing the demographic profile. Well, all they would need to do is then look at the specific sub-steps that they need to and access without reviewing the entire list. This is another hierarchical format in a zoomed format. So you can have the procedure and then you have the detail. In a graphical format, you are breaking long processes into shorter sub-processes with a few steps in each. So you can use screenshots to illustrate a procedure. Some people really like this particular format. This can be helpful if the person doesn't have English as a first language, for example, or the literacy level is low. Graphics are very helpful, easy to understand, and are of great benefit in a standard operating procedure. In the flowchart format, this is going to be a graphical way to present the logical steps in a decision-making process. There are generally accepted flowchart symbols that should be used, and you can, if you go into more detail on this, you'll know what type of symbol is used for which step in the procedure to make it even easier to understand. So you want to protect your standard operating procedure. Remember, this is going to be the way in which the company does business, and so it can be very valuable to know this business process. So you want mechanisms in place to protect the integrity of the document, because it's a disaster if a procedure is modified either accidentally or maliciously, because then the person's following the wrong procedure. And so there's going to be a need for revisions, and so there has to be a process in place to approve or authorize or test those provisions before they become official. And that authorization is going to be given by the information systems owner. In relation to change control, there may be internal changes such as new employees or business opportunities or applications, or there may be external changes such as new laws or regulations. So change control is an internal procedure where only authorized changes are made to software, hardware, network access privileges, or business procedures. So you want to have a policy in place for change control also. When you propose a new change, you want to have some sort of assessment on the need for this change, and then follow that up with a formal request for change. That request is going to be reviewed by the data owner before being authorized, and then there's going to be the monitoring of the implementation and whether or not and all of these changes should be documented and logged. Then the change has to be communicated to all relevant parties. With an incident response program, the key here is going to be ready to respond and recover. So a plan is different to procedure in that it's a roadmap for reporting, responding, and recovery action. So the incident response procedures are steps for implementing that plan. And then the program will be the plan plus the procedures. Okay, so an incident response program begins with identifying all foreseeable incidents and assigning a severity level. The various security levels will be based on their operational, reputational, legal impact to the organization, and these will typically be assigned by executive management. You want to organize these into two tiers, procedures that are developed for each tier to address response time and responsibility, and then you want to assign an assignee of response responsibility, that is to say a designated incident handler. It's useful to have a point person that coordinates the incident response. There can be, depending on the organization, different tier levels. So tier 1, for example, would be immediate response if there's a confidential data at risk or an attack. There is a 2 to 4 hour response if there is let's say a loss of a mobile device. 24 hours for example, sharing of user accounts, or a 3 business day response for an industry alert, let's say, and then an unspecified response time for rumors or incidences that are non-conforming events. It's not what we expected, but nevertheless, we want to investigate that, even though it's not a breach. Things didn't go to plan. The designated incident handler is a key person in an incident response because they're going to be tasked with responding within the designated time frame. They can involve the necessary people, they can manage the problem, they can identify the evidence in detail and maintain the chain of custody. That becomes very, very important when you are dealing with litigation. And then they can control access to the evidence. They complete and submit the appropriate documentation for review and analysis. So they have a big role within a company during an incident. The testing suspected and observed security weaknesses are done only authorized employees or third-party contractors should be allowed to do this. Other employees want to be forbidden from testing weaknesses. You don't want them sort of randomly going and doing penetration testing, for example. This would be considered an intentional misuse. So the acceptable use or affirmation agreement should clearly state the importance of compliance in this regard. Malicious software can include viruses, worms, spyware, and the like. And so you need to have a policy in place to protect against, detect, and contain malware. So this is a big job within IT security. Malware controls can consist of prevention and detection controls. So this will be limiting installing software on company computers, user accounts, not having administrative rights, anti-malware software, for example. You don't want to completely rely on antivirus. You want to make sure that the system is not running services that they shouldn't be. And you want to have an awareness campaign, typically, to recognize potential malware signs. It's important to have scheduled backups as part of integrity protection. And so typically it's required to have a 3-generation strategy. So grandfather, father, son is usually known as, so they have separate tapes for daily, weekly, quarterly, and then you want to do tests on random files at least monthly to make sure that the backup's working. So information backup is a key aspect to information security. So here you have a graphical format for grandfather, father, son tape rotation. And so if you go through the process here, you will see where to send the tape once it has been backed up. Now, of course, cloud-based backup is becoming a lot more popular, right? And it's obviously going to change the policies involved. And so, but nevertheless, I mean, cloud-based solutions are not appropriate for every organization. So backup tapes are still being done. They're not obsolete yet because certain organizations, they don't trust either, or the data that they are holding is too sensitive to be transmitted to the cloud, and therefore they're doing it through backup tapes in-house. Portable storage is key to operations management because it's used to carry out it can be used to carry out confidential company data. It can bring in an operating system which can be loaded, whether or not there is an access control in place or not. So we want to have a policy on managing portable storage. You want to be able to control non-company owned portable media. And so since everybody has a cell phone, for example, then that comes with a camera. That permits all sorts of taping, storing, or sending out sensitive data. So you want to have a policy around this also. No company owned, so for example, you want to say that no company owned removable material should be allowed to leave the company unless authorized, of course. An authorization can be for multiple routine procedures such as moving, or but a log is going to be required. So you want to train employees to understand that every device is capable of storing and removing sensitive information. So it's really important to be able to explain that, especially to somebody who doesn't have an IT background. When you are storing removable media, you want to store the backup tapes in a remote location, just in case there is a fire or flood in the main location. You want to make sure that the room is locked with no windows, that there is manual entry and exit, and there's a login, and then you want to have usually fireproof safes or have a procedure in place for destroying media prior to disposal. It's really important to have make sure that information cannot be extracted from disposed media, and so many different ways of doing this. You can do high power magnets. You can cremate the material. You can overwrite. You can randomize. You can paper shred, and so you want to be able to trust if you're using a third party, but you have to make sure that the third party is going to is either bonded or has some can provide you with some assurances regarding their safeguarding in the disposal process. So if the backup tapes are stolen, that's going to obviously affect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. Right? So you want to make sure that there are measures in place to secure transit. You want to use, let's say, authorized couriers. You want to have tamper-evident lockboxes. You want to have protective packaging materials. So you should have a policy for this also. Email is ubiquitous in business, but it's also a very insecure way to communicate. It can be intercepted, and it's difficult to tell. It's legally binding. The electronic attachments may contain hidden information, and it's very, very easy for people to make mistakes. By choosing, let's say, reply all. Everybody's been copied on a reply all that they shouldn't have at some point, right? So. It's not the greatest tool of communication, but nevertheless, it's used in practically all businesses. So you want to train employees that nothing should be committed to an email that would be appropriate in a company letterhead, and that's going to be very difficult because people use email very differently to when they're writing something on a letterhead. Any confidential information should be encrypted. Oftentimes, companies are increasingly using software like SharePoint, for example, where there's just simply a shared drive, which is then accessed by both parties. So in terms of the summary questions for this week, as we will discuss in class, you need to know what sorts of policies belong in the communications and operations management ISO domain, which policies are related to communications, and what other communications related policies should go in this domain. And then lastly, which policies are related to operations particularly. Right? So that's it for this week, and I will see you in class.